Hello everyone, Warmuffin here. Yeah, I know this tank has been talked to death ad nauseum that it's probably a crime against the Geneva Code at this point, but you know what? Everyone's been shooting their proverbial Panzerfaust into this thing, so I figured, why don't I take a shot at this thing? Yeah, so this is gonna be like the new Star Wars movie. Like, you know it's gonna suck, but you just gotta go see it and get it over with. So let's Operation Barbarossa into this conflagration because we all know how this is gonna end. Now, if you're like me, you probably wound up on War Thunder or World of Tanks, and you probably picked the German family tank tree because you thought German superiority, right? Well, what you wouldn't know is how wrong you were. Whoa, okay, let me just tap the brakes on the Blitzkrieg before I get too ahead of myself. Actually, contrary to what I said, the Panzer II, III, and IV were actually very well-made tanks. They were very versatile, and they got the job done, and they performed very well in the field. The Panzer III, for instance, there was the J model, the L model, and the Ausf M with upgraded armor and a bigger, better gun. The Panzer IV, it was the workhorse of the German army. It was a very well-made tank. There was many different variations, like the Sturmgeschütz IV, the assault gun, the Jagdpanzer, the Wirbelwind, and the Brummbär. However, when the German army was going up into France, invading France in 1940, they had to contend with the French Char B1 heavy tank. Or in 1941, they were going up against the T-34 or the KV-1. Okay, now we can talk about the elephant in the room. Or the Ferdinand. Well, actually, you can call it whatever you want. I mean, you might make some tank historians a little upset, but they're basically the same thing. Oh, great, now we're gonna get the names confused. Unfortunately, it's gonna be a continuing trend with this tank, and it's just gonna go downhill from here. Anyway, Hitler and his top brass in 1941 discussed the state of their tanks. They came to the conclusion that their tanks suck. So they developed a new tank program, and in this program, the specifications were that this new tank was supposed to have more armor and feature the 88mm gun, the famous flak gun that shoots down aircraft. Ultimately, we have two companies competing for this German army contract to create the super heavy tank. We have Ferdinand Porsche and the Henschel Company. Luckily enough for Porsche, he's already created tank hulls from the previous tank program, designated VK3001. The name of his tank was the Type 100. So he's going to reconstitute his Type 100 into the new tank program, being VK4501, which we will know later as the Ferdinand Tank Destroyer. Don't worry, if you're confused up to this point, you should be. This is where the fun begins. But uh-oh, we got a problem, because Porsche wants to fit this new system, the petrol-electric drive, into his tank, which just can't accommodate it because it's too big. So at this point, it's like already having to stuff more things aggressively into your suitcase because you can't get it to fit. Now, I'm not a tank engineer, but if your tank is constantly having mechanical problems, breaks down, and has enough engine fires that it makes Allied bombers think twice before wasting their bombs on your factory, then you might call it quits, or you might cut your losses. But not for Porsche, no, because he was so confident that he'd get the contract that he made 91 of these tanks. So, both Henschel and Porsche's tanks were tested in April of 1942. And no surprise, Henschel won the tank contract because it was much simpler than the Ferdinand, and also doesn't explode going up small inclines. But hey, this is the Tiger tank that we all know and love. And here is what the Ferdinand hull looks like with the Tiger turret. Looks kinda weird. However, that didn't stop Porsche as he continued to work on his exploding soda can until September of 1942, but stopped when Albert Speer sees the Frankenstein tank. So he decides to turn the tank into a Panzerjäger, or simply tank destroyer. Now, in order to make their doom-conquering unicorn tank, they extend the armor thickness to 200mm and added a bigger gun, but they forgot the engine! And because they increased the weight, the overly complicated torsion bar system could barely handle it. But whatever, I guess that's not important either. The vehicles were completed in May of 1943. 90 were Ferdinands, and the rest were converted into recovery and command vehicles. When the German army faced off against the Russians in the historic tank battle of Kursk, some German soldiers described how some of their Ferdinands would go up a hill, catch fire, and explode. But at least the tank taught them how to be good demolition experts. Could you imagine the Russians just watching that show? Like, hey, Ivan, did you do that? That was my attempt at a Russian accent. Now, General Guderian, one of the German generals on the Eastern Front, described the Ferdinand's role and how they were used. Now, German tank doctrine for Panzerjägers was for them to stay back behind the infantry, and yet the Ferdinands were used to spearhead the infantry. Okay? And predictably, they find themselves isolated and overrun. The problem was, like, we didn't have enough of those. They didn't have any self-defense weapons. Because, again, they weren't intended to have them. Funny enough, because of the location of the engine, if an enemy shell were to hit the superstructure, the front of the tank around the barrel, the turret would throw the subsequent shrapnel into the engine and disable it. Did Wile E. Coyote make this tank? So after the Battle of Kursk, they got sent to the rebuild program in Austria to hopefully fix the engines. Well, if you guys said that, then you would be correct, but the answer is no. They didn't. Anyway, they were completely fitted in December and January of 1944. But wait, there's another problem. Why are they still using this thing? There happens to be a little invasion going on in Italy. So what should we do with these tanks that have mechanical problems and engine problems that blow up at the slightest bit of elevation? Why, send them to Italy, of course. A geographically high country, and surprise, surprise, most of the vehicles just broke down. But, despite its almost irredeemable development process and characteristics, the tank is not without its merits, as it was very effective on open ground from about 6 kilometers away, while also utilizing its high explosive round. The tank destroyer proved to be very meritorious when it was used as intended. In fact, the 653rd Heavy Panzerjäger Battalion touted that they destroyed 320 tanks. This was because of the tank's firepower and protection. But do any more of these tanks still exist? Luckily enough, yes. The Bovington Tank Museum featured the Ferdinand with their Tiger exhibit. If you were to go to a tank museum, of course you would look in reverence at the Allied Shermans, Churchills, and Matildas with profound veneration. But of course, some people are always drawn to the reputation of the Panzers. Nothing is more eye-opening and mystifying than the big metal beasts that leave nothing to the imagination in scale and power. And that was my first video on the YouTube. Thank you for sticking around. If you made it this far, congratulations! Help me conquer YouTube by pushing that big red button on the screen because it supports my channel, yada yada yada, you get it. Thank you, and see you next time.